I almost sat somewhere else. There was a seat closer to the aisle. Same row, 3 chairs down. Better sightline to the altar. Easier exit if the ceremony ran long. I had looked at it. I had considered it the way you consider the minor logistics of an afternoon you are slightly dreading. I had set my jacket on the chair beside me to hold it while I went to get a program, and when I came back, a pair of elderly cousins had taken both it and the jacket and were showing no awareness that either had been reserved. So I moved. I sat in the seat that was left. And 4 hours later, a woman I had met 90 minutes before that leaned close in the dark of the reception tent and said something so quiet it barely reached me, and something I had been carrying without knowing I was carrying it put itself down at last. My name is Griffin Mercer. I was 35, a marine biologist at a research station outside of Monterey. This gets a specific reaction at social events, a brightening, an, "Oh, really?" A predictable sequence of questions about dolphins that I had ranked by how much I enjoyed answering them. What the job actually looked like, early mornings on the water before the light was fully up, long hours of data that required real patience and care to read, and the particular discipline of watching something that doesn't know it's being watched and doesn't perform for you. The ocean keeps its own schedule. You learn it or you don't, and if you don't, the ocean doesn't mind. I had been doing this work for 11 years, and the mornings still felt like something I hadn't quite earned the right to, which I think is the correct way to feel about the best parts of your life. I had driven up the coast to Carmel for the wedding of my college roommate, Pete Nakamura, who was marrying a woman named Diane who possessed, in equal and related measure, warmth and executive competence. She made people feel cared for and organized at the same time, which Pete, who was neither organized nor particularly caring about being organized, had apparently decided was exactly what he needed, and he was right. I was happy for him in the clean, uncomplicated way that requires no adjustment on your own behalf. Pete and Diane were right for each other in a way you could see from the outside, which is the rarest kind of right. I was alone at the wedding. I mention this not for sympathy, but because the seating arrangement is important. I had ended a relationship about 18 months earlier that had been, in hindsight, a long and careful argument between two people who were not quite wrong for each other, but were not right enough, and who were both too reasonable to say so plainly until there was nothing left to say. We had been reasonable all the way through, considerate at the end. I had not been devastated, which was its own kind of information. I had been alone since then in the way that is not loneliness exactly, but is the awareness of the shape a person leaves when they go. The ceremony was on the grounds of a property above the water. The chairs were arranged in a curved arc that gave everyone an equal angle on the altar. I noticed this the way I noticed anything well designed, with a small appreciation for the person who had thought it through. I collected a program from the table at the entrance, turned back to the row where I'd been sitting, and found my seat occupied by 2 elderly cousins who appeared to have claimed it, and my jacket, with absolute confidence. The empty seat was 2 rows back, on the end of a row, next to a woman who was reading her program with the focused attention of someone actually reading it, rather than holding it as social prop. I sat down. She didn't look up from the program. "There are 14 people in the wedding party," she said. "That seems like a lot." "It does," I said. "Pete always does things at scale." Then she looked up. "Sorry, you know Pete?" "College roommate," I said. "Griffin." "Nora," she said. She had dark eyes and the kind of face that communicated things slightly ahead of what she said. The expression arrived before the sentence, and the sentence was always the more official version of whatever the expression had already told you. She was wearing something the color of deep water at noon, which I noticed the way I noticed things professionally, with real attention, without announcing it. She had the quality some people have of sitting in a chair as though she had been there for a while, which she hadn't. I had seen her arrive. "I'm Diane's oldest friend," she said. "We met when we were 7. I was at the wedding Diane was supposed to be in when she met Pete." She paused. "There's a symmetry to that." "There is," I said. She looked back at the program. "The officiant has a good face," she said. "I think that matters. You want someone who looks like they believe what they're saying. What does that face look like?" I said. She considered it seriously. "Like someone who has actually thought about what a promise is," she said, "rather than someone who has memorized what to say about it." I looked at the officiant. She was right. The ceremony was exactly as beautiful as it should have been, which is what a well-designed ceremony does. Meets the occasion without exceeding it. Pete and Diane had written their own vows, which is always a risk and in this case had paid off. Pete's were funny in the right places and sincere in the right places. Diane's were shorter than anyone expected and more precise than anyone but Nora would have predicted, and I heard Nora exhale quietly beside me when Diane delivered the last line, the way you exhale when something lands exactly where you hoped it would. She worked on those for 2 months, Nora said quietly, during the applause. They're very her, I said. Nora looked at me. Yes, she said. The way you say yes when something is accurate, and the accuracy is the point. We were seated at the same table at the reception. Neither of us had arranged this. I found out later that Diane had placed all the solo guests together, which was either strategy or mercy, and given that Diane was who she was, it was probably both at once. The table had 6 people. Me, Nora, a colleague of Pete's who was recently divorced and managing it with the specific brightness of someone working very hard to seem fine, a pair of cousins who were not the pair who had taken my chair, and a marine science teacher from Portland who spent the first part of dinner explaining to me why the research station I worked at had published a paper the previous year with a methodological error in the second section. She was right, I told her so. She seemed slightly disappointed that I agreed. Nora was across from me during dinner, which meant we talked around the table more than to each other. The conversation was wide and warm, the kind that happens when strangers find themselves in a room decorated for an occasion and decide to meet the room's energy. But I was aware of her in the specific way you become aware of a fixed point, not by looking at it constantly but by knowing precisely where it is. She was a translator. Literary fiction, from French and Italian into English. 4 published translations and a 5th in progress. A novel by an Italian writer she described as like being inside someone's memory of a place you've never been, with the satisfaction of someone who loves what they are describing. I recognized that quality. I felt it about early mornings on the water. Do you miss things? I asked her. When you translate, she looked at me across the table. Always, she said. That's the work. You find the nearest true thing in English, and you accept that nearest to true is what you have. Some days that's enough. Some days you set the manuscript down and think about what the writer was reaching for, and wonder if you're adequate to it. And then what? Then I pick it up again, she said. Because the alternative is not doing it, and not doing it is worse. I thought about that for a while without answering, which she seemed to take correctly, as thinking, not as the end of the conversation. What do you do with the things that don't translate? I said. She looked at me, long enough that the person next to her said something that required her attention, and she turned to answer, and when she came back the conversation had moved on. But the question stayed where I'd left it, I could tell. She had filed it somewhere she was planning to return to. After dinner the dancing started and the tent lights dropped to the warm low kind, and the table dispersed the way reception tables always do. The recently divorced colleague to the bar with the relieved energy of a man finally off duty, the marine science teacher to the floor with surprising commitment, the cousins to find the cousins they liked better. I stayed with my wine, Nora stayed with hers. She was watching the dancing with the same attention she'd given the ceremony, actually looking, not watching in the performed way. I like watching people decide to stop being careful, she said. The beginning of a reception everyone is managing themselves a little, and then something shifts and they stop. What shifts it? I said. She thought about this for a moment, which is what she did with questions she found worth answering. The first song old enough that nobody had to choose it, she said. The one everyone already knows the words to. Nobody's responsible for it being there, so nobody's performing a taste. It just is. That's when people stop managing. As if arranged for the demonstration, the band moved into something from the late 80s, and a ripple of recognition moved through the tent. Heads turning, people smiling at each other the way you smile at something you share without having planned to share it, and the dance floor filled with the specific looseness of people who had stopped calculating. I watched Nora watch it happen. There, she said, quietly satisfied. There, I said. She looked at me briefly, then back at the floor, and smiled to herself the way you smile at something you predicted coming true. And she picked up her wine and turned her chair a few degrees toward the dancing rather than the table. And I did the same, and we sat like that for a while, shoulder to shoulder, not quite, facing the same direction, without saying anything. It was comfortable in a way that shouldn't have been possible after 3 hours, which meant it wasn't about the hours. Pete found me eventually, materializing out of the crowd with his particular energy, grabbed my arm, pulled me onto the floor, because Pete has always operated on the assumption that reluctance is a problem solved by forward motion. I danced badly for 2 songs and retreated to the edge of the tent with the specific relief of a man who has done his social duty. Nora was where I had left her. She had her chin resting in her hand, watching the floor with an expression I had been collecting definitions for all evening and still couldn't quite name. Something between contentment and thought, something that had room in it for both. "You survived," she said. "Barely," I said. The real smile, the one that moved through her whole face and changed it. I had been waiting for it to appear again, I realized, without knowing I'd been waiting. We talked at the edge of the floor while the reception continued around us, not about anything consequential mostly, but in the way of 2 people who have passed the point of needing consequence to justify continuing. She told me about the Italian writer she was translating. I told her about a study we'd been running on migration patterns that had turned up an anomaly we hadn't been able to explain for 8 months. She asked the right questions, which told me she was actually following rather than performing interest. I asked about the untranslatable things, the words she found with no English equivalent, and she described 3 of them with a care that made it clear she thought about them regularly, that they were guests who had moved in during the translation and not left. "They live in the margins," she said. "I write them in the margins of the manuscript and sometimes I just sit with them." "What do you do with them in the end?" I said. She looked at me. "I do the best I can," she said. "I find the nearest true thing and I commit to it." At some point, Pete's best man tapped the microphone for a late toast, and the tent rearranged itself around us, and we were briefly separated by the movement of people, and when it settled I was a few feet further from her, holding a glass for the toast, and she was across the small distance that had opened, holding hers. The best man spoke for 4 minutes. He was good at it. People laughed at the right parts. I looked at Nora twice during it and she was watching the best man, focused, and then she glanced at me as if she had felt the looking, and her expression was doing the thing again, the expression that arrived slightly before whatever she was deciding to say. She didn't say it. The toast ended. People drank. The music resumed. The reception wound down the way good ones do, in layers, gradually, the crowd thinning, and the music softening, and the lights beginning to communicate that the evening was closing, even while the people still there refused to acknowledge it. Pete and Diane had made their rounds and disappeared into the family. The dance floor held its committed core. Our table had long since become just the 2 of us, and then just our glasses on it. Nora was standing near the open edge of the tent where the canvas rolled back to the night garden, the dark beyond it running down toward the water somewhere out of sight. She had her wrap around her shoulders. She had been saying goodbye to someone, or thinking about leaving, or both. There was a quality of near departure to her posture. I walked over. We stood looking out at the dark garden, the warm light of the tent behind us, the ocean's sound reaching us faintly on the November air. "I have to drive back to the city tonight," she said. "Long drive," I said. "I like night driving," she said. "No one else on the road. You can actually think. What will you think about?" I said. She turned toward me, just slightly, just enough, and in the low light of the tent's edge her face had the quality I had been trying to name all evening, attention directed inward and outward at the same time, the expression of someone who is genuinely present in a moment while also turning it over, already beginning to translate it. She leaned toward me, barely, the way you do when what you're about to say belongs only to the person beside you, and I bent toward her, the way you do when you understand that something is being offered that requires you to meet it halfway. But before she spoke, I said, "I almost sat somewhere else." She pulled back slightly, just enough to look at me. "During the ceremony," I said, "there was a seat I'd had and I lost it. I moved to the one that was left." She looked at me for a moment. "Did you know," she said, "that I almost didn't come to this wedding at all?" I shook my head. "I was 6 weeks from finishing the manuscript," she said. "I told Diane it might not be possible, and she said—" She paused. "She said she needed me there. Not the way people say it, the actual way. I've known her for 30 years and she has never said something she didn't mean, and if she said she needed me there, she needed me there." "So you came," I said. So I came, she said. She looked at her wine glass for a moment, then back at me. I've been thinking about that tonight. What makes you leave the work for something, and what it means when you do. Something in that sentence had the quality her sentences sometimes had, carrying more weight than the words that made it up. The thing in the space around the meaning. Closest to true, I said. She looked at me. What? She said. That's what you do, I said. When you can't have the exact thing, you find what's closest to true and you commit to it. You said that at dinner. She was very still. You remembered that, she said. Yes, I said. She looked at me for a long moment, the expression before the sentence doing its work. I held it, the way you hold a fixed point, not constantly but knowing where it is. Then Pete's best man appeared at the microphone for a late toast. The tent rearranged itself around us. The moment broke. I was on my feet getting a glass for the toast, and when I looked back, the small distance that had opened between us was occupied by other people, and we were on either side of it, and the toast happened, and I kept my eyes forward, and I thought, say something before she goes. The reception wound down the way good receptions do, in gradual layers, the crowd thinning, the music softening, the lights doing the slow work of suggesting the evening was ending, even while the people still there chose not to acknowledge it. Pete and Diane had made their rounds and disappeared. The dance floor held its devoted core. Nora was standing near the open edge of the tent where the canvas had been rolled back to the night garden, the dark running down toward the water somewhere out of sight. She had her wrap around her shoulders. She had been saying goodbye to someone, or thinking about leaving, or both. I walked over. We stood looking out at the dark garden, the warm rectangle of the tent behind us, the faint sound of the ocean arriving on the cold air. I have to drive back to the city tonight, she said. Long drive, I said. I like night driving, she said. No traffic. You can think. What will you think about? I said. She turned toward me, just slightly, and in the low warm light at the tent's edge her face had the quality I'd been trying to name all evening. Attention directed inward and outward simultaneously. Someone genuinely present in a moment while already beginning to turn it over. And she said barely above a whisper very close to me in the dark, ask me for my number before I go. That was it. That was what stopped my heart. Not a declaration, not a revelation, a door, held open, barely. Just wide enough for one person to choose to walk through. The smallest possible invitation, in the quietest possible voice, by someone who had spent enough of her life finding the nearest true thing to know when that was the only move available. She hadn't said, I want to see you again, or I've had a wonderful evening. She had given me the action. She had left the doing of it to me, which was an act of precision I understood immediately and have thought about many times since. I straightened. Can I have your number? I said. She straightened too. She looked at me directly. The real smile, the one that moved through everything. Yes, she said. You may. I called her the following Tuesday. Not because I waited strategically, because I had driven back to Monterey on Sunday with the windows down and gone out on the water Monday morning and spent 2 hours thinking about the space between what you can say exactly and what you can say truly, and what it means to give someone the nearest thing and have them understand what you meant by it. By Tuesday I had finished thinking about it and I wanted to talk to her. She answered on the second ring. I wondered when you'd call, she said. Tuesday, I said. Yes, she said. That seems right for you. I did not ask how she knew what seemed right for me from one evening. She was a translator. Reading was the work. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes. I know because I was watching the clock on my office wall for the last 20 of it. Not to end the call, but because I had a meeting and was beginning to understand I was going to miss it, and that I was not going to do anything about that, and that this was a fact about me I was learning in real time. The following spring she came to Monterey for a weekend. I took her out on the water at 6 in the morning, before the light was fully up, which is the hour I had been trying to describe to people for 11 years without quite landing it. She stood at the rail and watched the surface, and didn't say anything for a long time. When she did speak, she said, "There isn't a word for this in English either. What would the Italian be?" I said. She thought about it seriously. "Something that means the light before the light," she said. "When the water knows it's coming before the sky does." I looked at the water. "That's it exactly," I said. She looked at me. "I know," she said. "That's why I said it." The novel she was translating came out the following autumn. She thanked me in the acknowledgments, not by name, because she said that wasn't the right place for that story, by description instead. To the marine biologist who reminded me that patience is also a form of attention and that the nearest true thing is sometimes the most honest one, Pete called me the week it came out. "Is that you?" he said. "That's me," I said. "I did that," he said. "I introduced you. You took my seat," I said. A pause. "I'm still taking credit," he said. "Fine," I said. "Take it." Have you ever ended up somewhere you didn't plan to be? A wrong seat, a different table, a conversation you didn't engineer, and understood later that the unplanned thing was the whole point? And have you ever had someone offer you the smallest possible door and felt exactly how much courage it took them to hold it open? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one found you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.